discussion of eHackathon 2020. And as said by Dr. Muthu, today's topic will be what is cybersecurity's new normal. Okay, so first let me introduce you to Mr. Kirish Shankar Gupta. He is in Apple and he is the information security analyst since March 2018. Now, prior to this, he was the member of the advisory board for the EC Council Certified Security Analyst Certification and Examination. And he was also there in Intel Corporation, and he was a lead and penetration testing Force India, L&T consultant. Also in Rhino Security Labs, penetration tester. He was a student of BTech in Information Technology of Institute of Engineering and Management during the session 2010 and 2014. I welcome Kirit to the welcome. Okay, and I'm very happy that you are a panelist here, and to be very sure, I was there, your head of the department, when you passed out. Same with Rohit also. So I will now introduce Rohit to all of you. Mr. Rohit Shikdar is the co-founder of Distronics since October 2013. And he was the value engineering intern at Startup Focus Program in SAP from June 2014 till August 2014, San Francisco Bay Area. He was also a student of BTech in Information Technology of Institute of Engineering and Management during the session 2011 and 2015. So as I said, today's topic will be, what will be cybersecurity's new normal? So let me first talk a bit about what the coronavirus did. We all know it still. To introduce the topic, the coronavirus or the COVID pandemic, as we all know, has really forced changes for much of the business world, and cybersecurity is also included in it. So what we can expect going forward? From the way we can see the shopping malls and the restaurants and cineplexes operate, to how sports are played, educational organizations function. Of course, we have to maintain the social distancing. Many people expect that life to run a whole lot in a different manner in the pandemic's repercussion. So the biggest question for all of us is, though we know that it is a pandemic situation, what will be the new normal for those in the cybersecurity area? So my first question will be to Mr. Kirish Shankar Gupta. Can you just enumerate what will be the cybersecurity's new normal look like?
I think what we're looking at is a lot of remote workers connecting in from outside of office, which is very different from what has been the norm so far. So far, every company which has wanted to maintain security and privacy and confidentiality has ensured that their employees have been sitting inside their offices where they have full control of the network, full control of how the data is being shared, or full control of whatever conversations or whatever meetings are going on. However, at this point, let's say that we are talking about a company which has employees working on some kind of confidential project who are connecting from a remote location. The company no longer has the same amount of control that they would have with regards to the surroundings to begin with. And more importantly, the network security at home. Because let's accept it, a company can afford to install expensive firewalls, fancy VPNs, stuff which can never be set up at someone's home. At home, we are all going to be using probably an Airtel or a Vodafone on a wireless router, and we're probably going to be connecting to it over Wi-Fi. And most of the people, most of the home users who are using these networks have ISP configured devices, which may not usually be very secure. We are talking about usernames and passwords, which are easily guessable. We are talking about routers, which are not enterprise grade routers. They are simple home routers, which very often don't employ the best in terms of security. It may not even have security in the first place, or the password may just be someone's phone number. So I think the very first thing that companies need to ensure when we talk about employees connecting from outside is standardizing how employees connect in. So I'm talking about VPNs, I'm talking about firewall connections. I'm talking about standardizing network security at home, and also very importantly, device security on laptops and phones. So probably higher requirements and higher restrictions on the devices which employees use in the first place to connect from home. Earlier, they might have been allowed to use different applications or access a number of different web services. Maybe Google Drive and Dropbox and WhatsApp for web were earlier allowed on a Mac or a PC, but right now it may not be because the folks at Office, the network team, does not have any control over what's being shared over these channels anymore.
Okay. So now we find that companies across a range of sectors are increasingly adopting a hybrid workforce model, where, as you can see, the artificial intelligence is powered with digitally working alongside with their human counterparts. So how do you think we can secure the hybrid workforce in the post-COVID era? I hope you understand what I say. Mostly our day-to-day activities could be automated in approximately 60% of our roles. And the organizations are already embracing automation through a hybrid workforce, and which are giving their workers the opportunity to take on more complex and fulfilling tasks. Things like creative problem solving, empathy, then negotiation and people skills. So I'm talking about this hybrid workforce. So how do you think that we can secure the hybrid workforce in the environment, work
I think
environment?
security, once again, stems right from the very basics. I mean, it's usually the human link, which is the weakest link in the chain of security. It's not very often that hackers are cracking long, complex passwords, or they're figuring out a way to break AES encryption or something like that. It's usually a user whose password is maybe ABC123 or QWERTY, UIOP, etc. It's always bad practices which result in these kind of issues. So when you're talking about hybrid workforce and people automating most of the tasks, we are talking about devices which are simply connected remotely to a company's network. So I think the protection comes in terms of implementing access, authorization, and authentication controls. Let's say that I should not be allowed to access specific parts of a company's network. I should not be allowed to use it. It should be blocked off at the network level. Similarly, let's say that I should not be allowed to access a bunch of applications which are internal only, or they may be time barred for me. Access control should be put in place to ensure that this happens. Another interesting way in which companies get breached is via phishing. So in the past, maybe 1 or 2 years, we have heard of a large number of pretty common breaches happening across different companies. So a main reason why this happens is because people click on links on emails which might contain viruses, which might contain some kind of malware, some kind of program which is monitoring what they're entering. Maybe they're installing a keylogger on the system. So ensuring that anti-malware and antiviruses are installed on the system is also extremely important. Another very important thing is credentials getting leaked. So there are many web applications, many services which get compromised. So for instance, let's say I set up an account with my email address and my password on a specific service. Let's say I'm using a food delivery service and I'm using my email and a specific password. And let's say this said food delivery service gets compromised, it gets hacked. So that usually means that the password which I used on the service is now leaked and it's now available to hackers. And this password, if I'm using on any other service, let's say I'm using it to access my company email, let's say I do not have different passwords for different services. And now suddenly hackers have access to my company emails from a food delivery service, which was compromised maybe a month back.
So I think most importantly is that we have to make people aware of this cybersecurity term and how they can be aware of the vulnerabilities that are causing havoc and they're having data breaches and all. Okay, do you think that we have this unified cyber infrastructure to secure the hybrid environment? And it is really very critical. So do you think we are prepared for it?
I'm sure companies are trying to cope. Nothing exists which can be called perfectly secure. Everything can be hacked. It's pretty much a saying in the industry. So I'm sure with the beginning of this pandemic, with everyone, with the workforce suddenly moving outside of office, pretty much all of the corporates would have scrambled to ensure that employees were following best practices when they were connecting in. So people would be trying, companies would be trying, network teams would be trying across the country and definitely outside of the country as well. But I would also say that I'm not very convinced that all of these efforts are complete. It's more of a stopgap or patchwork kind of measure to ensure that maybe the most common issues or the most visible attacks are not possible. But at the end of the day, there's always going to be something or the other that makes, that makes that one single small entry point, and it just takes one lucky hacker to find that entry point and gain access to a company. So even with companies following best practices, it's usually just layers of protections, which is the only way in which you can prevent hacks from happening. Of course, that coupled with education of the employees, good security policies, etc.
Yeah, definitely. Anybody has any question out of this? You have any question to Mr. Kirit? So you can ask him, or else we can take the questions later on. Okay, now let me turn my attention to Mr. Rohit Sarkar. I will be asking him about the IoT. And as we know that in the industrial kingdom, the digital transformation means nothing less than turning traditional industrial systems into industrial internet systems. We have already had this earlier discussion on the security of Internet of Things. So Internet of IoT trustworthiness is very important, and it basically represents the degree of confidence that an IoT system will operate in conformance with a set of requirements, despite the environmental damages or disturbances that we have, also human error, system faults, or maybe cyber attacks. Not just during the normal operation, but also during
I think.
Hello, am I audible? Am I
Yes,
audible?
ma'am.
Yeah, now we are audible, madam.
Now
Okay,
you're audible.
you have not heard what I said.
Just last line.
Last line.
Last line you have. So should I repeat it again?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe my network was down. Okay, I wanted to say to Mr. Rohit that in the industrial kingdom, the digital transformation means nothing less than turning our traditional industrial systems into industrial internet systems. So IoT trustworthiness is very important, and basically it represents the confidence that an IoT system will operate in conformance with a set of requirements, despite the environmental disturbances, human error, faults, and or the cyber attacks, and not only in during the normal time or normal operation, but also during the maintenance and downtime. So how would you ensure trustworthiness in IoT devices?
Thank you for the background, ma'am. Many other teachers, Kirit, and other attendees. Just as a background, so we have been working in this industrial IoT segment for about 4 or 5 years now. Have deployed a little over 20, 25,000 IoT endpoints in 40 plus cities, both in India and abroad. One thing which has been a common problem is the security aspect of it. From a trustworthiness factor, I can divide it into a couple of segments. The first segment, it's definitely the reliability. But the second segment, which is being predominantly more important as of today, is the security front. For example, when you're talking about domestic IoT, may that be a domestic smart lamp or your Alexa, people are not really heeding to how much of a security measure they can actually turn out to be. People are more concerned about their manufacturing setups and Industry 4.0 implementation and security measures there. But we are really overlooking the factors, and we are yet to find any standardization in the industry. And there's only one core reason for it, is that unlike traditional systems, IoT devices are usually resource constrained. Right? We have heard in order to run a basic SSL encryption and decryption, we need probably a few MB of RAM, if not more, and a couple of GB and a couple of maybe a gigahertz of processing, etc. In the IoT front, we talk about RAMs that are the size of 100 KB. Or rather even less, 10 KB, 20 KB. We talk about processing speeds which are in kilohertz at times and megahertz. These can at max do serial processing one line at a time. They are really not meant to do high-end encryption and decryption. And this is becoming a problem because the entire security standardization or security protocol standardization set by IEEE or other bodies have predominantly never thought that what would happen if you do not have the resources to run those basic protocols, right? And that is becoming a challenge because in order for IoT to sustain or in order for IoT to make sense, having resource constraint or having low cost implementation is key. So we cannot keep on deploying n number of i3 or Celeron or Atom processors on the edge. It would be extremely expensive and it would not solve the problem statement that is meant to be solved or that can be solved using IoT. So that is one of the major problems. And though we are talking about IoT in the year 2020, but I would just like to take your attention towards 10 years back when some of the initial cyber attacks happened through this IoT interface where it was not even called IoT. It was called typical SCADA systems or ICS system or PLC systems, but yet cyber attacks have happened. So around in 2010, there was a major cyber attack and the virus was named Stuxnet, STUXNET. It was very common in those days where it was hacking SCADA systems and PLCs, and everyone, even the largest companies, were unable to figure out why were this systems going down. After that, a couple of years later, one more important or rather very publicly showcased IoT hack was in 2015 when a couple of hackers, just to prove the point, hacked a Jeep vehicle, an automobile by Jeep, and which was not even internet connected. They hacked in through the radio systems and also some of the protocols that were meant for maintenance of the cars. And they could take control over your brakes and lights and air conditioning and so on and so forth. And coming to 2020, when even in India, we are talking about connected cars and so on and so forth, you can imagine when things were hackable per se, even when internet connectivity was not so prominent in these devices, which were not meant to be connected, then in today's time, it is much, much, much more dangerous. I foresee will never ever purchase an internet connected car in today's world. They're absolutely unsecure. They're absolutely unsecured. Absolutely. I foresee, no, I've worked in companies who manufacture the electronics parts of it, and I can say the protocols which are running there are unsecure. If anyone has the definitive motive to do something with it, they can. Just imagine you're going on the highway at 100 kilometers per hour and your brakes are turned off. So it's extremely lethal and we are taking it very lightly. So a lot of effort has been put towards this agenda of making it secure. In 2018, there was a US Congress introduced a pact. It's called the IoT Act. And the main reason for that act was to enable certain degree of security measures, at least for the government projects. Because even in today's time, even not only abroad, but in India, there are an extensive amount of IoT implementation in the government projects as well, smart cities, water supply, and so on and so forth. And all these are directly affecting human lives. So in US in 2018, this was formed. In the Asian countries or the African countries, we are yet to see anything of that sort. the rules and regulations that are kind of referred to, at least in India, are outdated by 20 years, and they're really not meant or not even applicable for an IoT space, where, as I said, the resource constraint kind of kills the entire possibility of implementing standard security protocols. And the only thing that has come along in this last 4 or 5 years, I would say, is the wireless technology protocols that was mandated. So may that be an IEEE 802.15.4 or a LoRaWAN or an NB-IoT. These were some of the protocols which were standardized about in the last 4 to 5 years. And this standardization, I would say, is more of a piecemeal effort and not a complete holistic effort, because you still can have multiple ways in which things can be attacked or intruded into. So I would say there was a Gartner report this year itself, which says that by the end of this year or next year, by 2021, if about 25% of IoT users would have been hacked or data theft would have happened without even them knowing. And that's the funny fact, that a lot of these IoT equipment that the cyber attacks are not only meant for kind of making any effort towards a destructive purpose, but also for data collection. Just imagine that you are running a manufacturing plant, let's say rubber, let's say chemicals, glass, which has a lot of proprietary technology, and you have a lot of IoT sensors, etc., monitoring the plant, and someone quietly is monitoring your data without you knowing. That's an extreme amount of data theft without you being aware of it. So I think these parameters are yet to be realized in a more mature format. I think for the maturity to come, there needs to be probably 1 or 2 incidents which makes people aware. I've absolutely seen that's how the world usually moves. Until unless something bad has happened, we really do not react to it with the force and agenda that we are supposed to. And the other one is definitely connected home equipment. My recommendation, do not use them. They're absolutely unsafe. I think Kirit is on the panel. He can tell you how easy it is to hack an Alexa and record every conversation that you're having in your living room or in your bedroom. Like, it's that unsafe.
That's true. Even we are talking about, so you can imagine these driverless cars can be hacked, and the car can be stolen with lots of data in it. So really, we have to be very careful while adopting the newer technologies. Now, let me talk a bit about the employee privacy here, since we are into this post-COVID era and we are into this cybersecurity area. So mainly the employee privacy is a... Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So this employee privacy, it is a post-COVID pandemic, it could be a sleeping giant. Yeah, a global workforce that is concerned about their jobs and their loved ones is likely to cooperate with the health and screening and tracking measures that employers may adopt. But what's the cost to their morale and engagement? Now, how do we ensure privacy rights for employees post-COVID in a secured manner? Rohit.
I'll take this question in a different angle. I can speak from an employer's point of view. Sitting on the other side, there are a couple of issues that we have identified in the last 6 months or so. First and foremost is the employee privacy rights are defined in a very broad manner, even in India, which gives an employer access to not only the data and the possessions in the professional space, but also in the personal space. That may be social media, that may be other personal space documents, etc. The only reason being is that one kind of mentality which works in an employer's mind towards this work from home policy when it began was that non-disclosure agreements and pieces of paper really do not hold much value in India. Speaking from absolute experience, NDAs we sign, and there are enormous amount of loopholes to get away with it. Even the largest corporations are very well aware of it. And I think that's the basic route from where the employers are panicking, and they are kind of going on implementing and intruding into the employee's personal space in this entire scenario. Though we say that our business continuity plan had bring your own device policies and home security policies in check, with extensive device monitoring policies that may be your laptop, your cell phone, but till what extent? As Kirith was also mentioning, the companies which are specifically working with confidential data, not only R&D companies, but companies who, let's say, have government customers where you're dealing with a lot of public data. If a single leak happens, the onus comes to the employer irrespective. And I think the balance is yet to happen, because in the last 6 months, I have seen to the extent of camera monitoring of the employees for the time that they are working. And this was for the financial sector, that the financial sector had to keep on running. They did not stop just because it was a complete lockdown for the entire nation. The government sectors did not stop just because it was a complete lockdown for the entire nation. And these specific employers, which were dealing with extremely confidential data, they had to the point camera-based monitoring of their employees while they were working at home. So I would absolutely say that this is such a kind of critical junction that we are in right now, that the last 6 months has gone past, but the next 3 months are primarily going to decide that what is going to be the trend going forward. Because if we need to keep on continuing a work from home policy, then the amount of investment and the amount of capacity building that is required and the amount of maturity that is required, it is significantly missing at this point of time. So just to conclude, employers, both the employees and the employees really need to mutually work it out, because at the same front where the employees may feel intruded in their personal space at this, but on the flip side, the employers are at the risk of backlashes from their clients for the loss of confidential data. Because when you're working from an office environment, it keeps everyone's hair down and calm, because that network is secured. There's only so much data that can possibly leak from that network through physical or digital means. And the ones that the kind of that entire bubble is broken and it is completely scattered, I know very large corporations, especially finance and governments, who are having an enormously difficult time to really sign on a piece of paper to their customers that we guarantee no data leak will happen. Because the standard protocols to stop this is no more valid, and new protocols has not been established in a mature enough format. And so but it's a very critical juncture. I probably do not have an absolute conclusion, but the employees and the employer really need to mutually work it out during that scenario, because the next 3 months it's going to change. Either it's going to go back to partial normal. If not, then I see this is not the new normal. A major shift will come. for a chunk of the digital workforce.
So this is something new that we have come to know from Rohit, that it is really a breach of privacy on the part of the employees. So we were really unaware of this. And as I can say, the educational organizations, including our organization, we have not stopped a single day. Every day we were working from home. Not a single class we missed, and not a single meeting we missed, but not to that extent that Rohit has enumerated in financial organizations. Okay, we need to really have a check on this, and really the employee and employer need to sit and have some policy. Last, I would come to Kirit, and I would like to ask him, what do you think are the cybersecurity best practices? I mean to say, preparedness for a secure remote workforce, compliance, and building a cyber resilient environment. Really, how do we establish the security preparedness?
I'm sorry, I was muted. So I think that's a very big question to ask, because there's just so many things one can do in order to secure the work environment, because there's so many variables. We're talking about people, we're talking about devices, we're talking about networks, we're talking about servers. And then we're going on to the entire concept of data centers, and you have employee data, you have maybe companies which are processing payment information, and as you were just talking about, medical information. So I believe there are a lot of policies which actually help ensure that security is in place for these kind of requirements. We have stuff like PCI DSS, which deals with payment card information. PCI DSS is a very good guideline as to what a company should do in order to protect their payment information, for instance. Besides that, you also have stuff like HIPAA, which deals specifically with medical information relating to employees, relating to patients, etc. Besides all of these, there are data security standards like ISO as well. So I'm talking about ISO 27000. ISO 27000 is a policy, is a bunch of policies which companies can implement in order to ensure that they follow at least the baseline security requirements, in order to ensure that stuff like breaches don't happen very easily. But I think one of the things I should call out is that, and this is something I mentioned earlier as well, is it's not possible to absolutely stop any of this if employees or if people who are involved in the chain are not aware of what they should be doing. You can invest all the money in the world in implementing expensive firewalls, expensive security systems, and you can do all of the policy regulations that can be possibly done. But at the end of the day, if the employees do not have correct security knowledge, if they're using password as their password, for instance, it's just not going to work out. So I think it needs to start with education of the employees. Companies can enforce internal security policies. This can be around authentication, authorization, use of data. So for instance, work information cannot be shared over WhatsApp. You cannot have a conversation about confidential information of your company sitting in a restaurant or in a public location. And then companies can move on to all of these very useful, very handy requirements that are set down by the security standards, such as ISO, such as PCI, such as HIPAA.
Okay, so now we are open to audience question and answer. So I would request the audience to have their question answer. Please mention the name of the panelist you would ask the question to. Anybody?
Well, in the chat box, I have seen one person.
Ma'am, am I audible to you?
Yeah, audible.
Yes, my name is Ma'am Siddhartha Chatterjee, Assistant Professor, CSE Department, Gargi Memorial Institute of Technology. Today I have no any question, but I'll share one thing, and that entire program is very good. All the speakers are very good, organizers are very good, very informative sessions are there.
Thank you very much. If you have any other question to the panelists, you can ask.
Yeah. Hello. I have a question for Kirit, sir.
What is your name?
Ma'am, my name is Shaurya. I'm from second year IT department. And I have a question for Kirit, sir.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Sir, we are talking about regulating what should the employees do, and what information should they share or what they should not. But we are seeing that in the current in 2020 we saw one of the biggest breaches, that is the Twitter breach. And hackers are loving to say that humans are more vulnerable than the other vulnerabilities. So how can AI play a role in that, of monitoring the human behavior, that if they are telling someone confidential information, or if they are sending someone confidential information, so how can that be monitored?
That's an awesome question, actually, and you would be surprised to know that there are a lot of AI and ML solutions already in use by corporates, including probably the company that you mentioned, Twitter. But there is a downside and an upside to using AI or ML for making these kind of decisions. So let's say that you're having a conversation. Let's say that you work for a company that manufactures laptops, and you produce new laptops every year. And this is your most sensitive company's registered confidential information, which absolutely cannot go out because you're talking about leaks, you're talking about unannounced features getting out in public. So this is an example of data that you would like to keep inside your company and not outside. Now, at this point, you can have employees conversing with each other about, let's say, details of the device that they're working on. And you can train an ML model to identify when a conversation is happening about, let's say, hardware specifications, let's say device features or software features, anything for that matter. But there is the issue of what happens when the ML model or when the prediction is wrong. So let's say you are having a very standard conversation with a friend of yours regarding a laptop that they want to buy. And this ML model decides that, you're talking about laptops, you're talking about hardware features, software features, it looks fishy, so let's just block it. You are having a very harmless conversation, but the AI model is not mature enough to understand what is actually the sensitive information and what is not. It only understands depending on the data that it was fed. So these kind of measures are already in place in a lot of corporates, probably Twitter as well. But they usually work in an alerting mode, where if the algorithm detects that something is wrong, they raise an alert where actually humans sit and ensure that the flag is actually correct, that it's not inaccurate, or that it's not a bug on the ML logic. So another very interesting example of this, you would notice that a lot of facial recognition algorithms which use ML to identify what is a face and what is not a face would very often categorize something that is absolutely not a face, like maybe clouds or maybe the bark of a tree as a face. So you don't want something like that happening for something as critical as employee-to-employee communication, or even person-to-person communication when it involves employees.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. I would just add a last point or ask another question, that if we are monitoring the personal chats of someone, then we are monitoring the personal behavior of someone, and can that be a problem?
Okay, again, a very interesting question. So companies would usually refrain from monitoring personal chats of employees on their personal devices. Like, that's not something that is legal and that would ever be done by a company. However, what they have every right to monitor is the conversation that might be happening on an internal company chat. Let's say that we are talking right now over Skype, over company Skype, or we're talking about Slack, or you're sending emails. So this is exactly the kind of textual communication that these algorithms would be running analysis against, and it would be absolutely legal for a company to do it, because these conversations are happening on their own devices and their own systems.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Anybody has any other question?
Okay, this is Shashwati Burman. I have a very naive question to Mr. Kirit Shankar Gupta. My question is that we often do bank transactions from our mobile devices, and always the OTPs are coming in the same device, and we are using the same Wi-Fi from home. So So how safe is the transaction when the OTP is coming to the same device and we are logging in from the same device?
There's actually so much that can be said about this. But I would like to start off by saying that the banking system in India that's mandated by RBI enforces a two-factor authentication of payment. So if you're doing any transaction in India, you would usually not be able to do it by providing just a CVV and an expiry date. You would need an OTP. So a second factor is always required. This is not the case for many other countries. For example, if you're trying to use an American or a European payment portal, you would usually not require an OTP or a second factor. So that secures it to an extent. But I will again repeat what I've been mentioning multiple times throughout this session is that nothing is perfectly secure. So the moment you're talking about OTPs coming over SMS, there obviously exists a way to attack these systems. So there is a kind of attack which is called an SS7 attack, which basically allows a potential hacker to pretend to be a mobile tower and route the SMS from the bank to your mobile. So he would just need to be the hacker would need to be physically close to you and have the required hardware equipment to do this. The moment your phone recognizes their device as the cell phone tower, it would be accepting any SMSs from the hacker control device. So the OTP, which was coming from the bank servers, are now being routed through a hacker controlled hardware where he might be actually able to get your OTP. But that said, this is obviously a complicated attack to mount. And usually what is much more successful in India is someone calling you up, pretending to be your bank and telling you that your credit card has expired and he needs your credit card number and an OTP. That's how the majority of bank frauds happen. So if your own practices, if your device is secure, if your Wi-Fi is secure, I think there is sufficient level of protection to not be paranoid or very scared about these kind of attacks from happening. But of course, if you want to be going that extra mile to protect yourself further, there are many banks which provide small keychains or fobs. These keychains generate OTPs. So you don't have to rely on an SMS to come in. You press a button on this device and it generates an OTP and you enter that. And that serves to authenticate whatever transaction you're doing. So among banks that I've used, I know HSBC does this. Obviously, you're reducing your users' usability to an extent because right now you have to carry a separate device with you to get the OTP, but at the same time, you're increasing security. And again, that's the nature of how security works. If you're trying to enhance security, it usually comes with a reduction or a hit to usability or user simplicity.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, in this regard, I would like to give you one more information talking about banks. These banks, they have their, some hackers have their key loggers, which is basically the short form for the keystroke logger. Basically, this is a software and that tracks and logs the keystrokes on your keyboard. So we have to be very aware of this, and these keystrokes are actually typically in a covered manner. They are sent to the other persons, so they know your actions and you are being monitored, but without your knowledge. So we have to be really very careful about this. Okay, any other question? If you have any other question, we can take on two more questions.
So will it be safer that if I use my mobile for OTP and I log in from my laptop? Because my question is that I am logging in from mobile and in the same mobile OTP is coming. So will it be safer if I use two devices?
I would personally say that would not pose a problem. You can definitely use the same device for logging in as well as receiving of any OTPs, as long as your mobile itself is secure. So if you're using your mobile for banking, I think that's the most important. If you have any kind of viruses on your phone, then none of these protection measures work.
All right. So how safe are the Google Pay and Phone Pay, all these apps? Because sometimes we are literally forced to use it these days. How safe?
So all of these systems which process user payments usually undergo rigorous testing. And I mentioned PCI, it undergoes PCI checklists, it undergoes a bunch of other testing. So I would goes so far as to say that it would be reasonably secure for a vast majority of people to use. Of course, no one can guarantee security, not even the creators of Google Pay. UPI as a system works by verifying your bank account details, verifying your device, and then verifying whether you're entering the correct OTP or not. So if you have these 3 security measures in place and you're ensuring that the sources of this information is safe, I think it can be called reasonably secure, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question. It's not a question, it's a comment. I think I have Rohit here who works on industrial IoTs and IoT implementation. And I think he will be also agreeing that IoT devices can be used by hackers as a great method of hacking into devices, like creating small say IoT net, through which you can hack into systems or hack into other devices or pretend to be other devices. And this IoT as a safety, like for example, we always want to have, or when we open up Amazon, we see Alexa coming at a price of say maybe 3,000, 4,000. We say, oh wow, Alexa is coming. We are coming up with the smart TVs. So everywhere we are coming with it's kind of like we have iPhones which have something Siri embedded inside it. So there are so many devices which are with us. So in perspective of IoT, how will you say that whether they are safe to, how many are, you have said that there are many IoTs are not safe at all. I understand, because interoperability between IoTs are not there, but still, like perspective, you have been working with big giants on IoT implementation. So how are you securing your IoT devices which you have been implementing all over the globe?
Thank you for the question, sir. I think first, to answer one point, that how do you understand that it is secure or not? First and foremost thing that you can look for is it running a standardized operating system, or is it running a custom OS? That the moment someone says they're running a custom OS, if you can figure out if it's a Linux-based system or something, you can still breathe a sigh of relief that some standard security protocols can be implemented. If someone is not disclosing their operating system, I would grossly say it is insecure. How do we make it secure? Okay, now there are 2 aspects that we have been following. Primarily, one is that in the last 2 years specifically, the cost of processing, that is gigahertz per dollar, has reduced drastically. It is practically reducing every fortnight. So IoT device which had X amount of processing power 5 years back for $1 now really has 14 or 20X power at that same dollar. So whenever there is an enterprise grade deployment, first and foremost is in trying to kind of pack as much processing power as possible, keeping everything else in mind, cost, battery efficiency, etc., and trying to implement some format of encryption and decryption so that the basic data cannot be really hacked with a man-in-the-middle attack. But something else that we have been following in our large enterprise implementation is fogging. So what is fogging? Fogging is nothing but edge processing, quite a bit of edge processing. So we are kind of accumulating all the edge devices together. And it's more or less how our nervous system works, is that instead of taking every decision from the cloud, you're trying to make them intelligent enough to take some of the basic rudimentary decisions on the edge itself. And by rudimentary, I mean the aspect or the broadness of rudimentary has kept on increasing. That initially it was rudimentary, now it has slowly becoming more and more complex. Now, what it basically allows us to do is that if we have, let's say, for example, a factory, which is, let's say, 1 lakh square feet, we have about 1,000 or 2,000 IoT devices implemented there. We would take quite a few of these decisions through this fogging method, where It's basically called fog computing, where we are taking most of these decisions on the edge, and then there would be one kind of a node, kind of a hub or a router, which is like a second grade, a grade higher, a second level kind of operator device, which would accumulate the data and interface it with the cloud with all necessary protections in place. So hence, creating some form of, let's say, security layer without having to expose the end effector completely. So there is a complete air gap that is now being maintained for serious enterprise deployments or serious government deployments, a complete air gap. Because in IoT, when we speak, it's basically OT and IT. So in OT, the problem is that if you any sensible person will never allow you to take control over an OT. So control over an OT basically means is that you can control, let's say, the pressure of a steam valve in a steel plant. That is dangerous. That is what a SCADA system does. So you really need to air gap it. So right now we have gone back to basics, creating literal air gaps, like literal air gaps. Like this, so like two sets of decision making. An initial set will be done on this side of the air gap, and the other one will be done on the other side of the air gap. And there will be an extremely secured way of communicating that back and forth. So I think these are a couple of methods that we are kind of, or approaches that we are taking. So one is kind of distributing the compute and implementing new computing technologies in terms of how this security can be done through air gapping. And second is wherever possible, trying to push in enough processing power to put built-in basic encryptions, at least.
Thank you, Rohit.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we come to the end of today's session. And thank you very much, Rohit and Kirit, you have come here. And I'm really proud that you are working very hard and you have reached to the top. So we have been enlightened by the ideas and views of our two panelists, Mr. Rohit and Mr. Kirit, about the various aspects of new normal in workplace post-COVID-19 from the perspective of security in cyberspace as well as Internet of Things. So we have also come to know how to ensure privacy rights for the employees and also touched upon the related aspects of how to create cyber infrastructure in a hybrid work environment. So I thank our panelists and also I thank the audience. So with this, we come to the end of today's event. We will meet again tomorrow at 12 noon IST. And we will be starting with, if I'm not wrong, we will be starting with 3 MST, the most awaited 3-minute scholar thesis presentation. And after that, we will be having an invited talk by Mr. Abhishek Mitra. Thank you, everybody. Thank you all.
Kirit. Thank you, Rohit.
Just one thing to mention that the feedback link is posted in the chat group. So the participants are requested to fill up the feedback link so that they will get the participation certificate.